Hi, I'm Candace, founder of Sufficient Grace Social Services, where our mission is to create awareness for the prevention of child molestation, child sexual abuse, child abuse, and neglect, to help children to gain confidence and to find their voice, and also to help find healing from um, past sexual abuse and other childhood traumas through Christ. Today, I wanted to continue our conversation with about my book of becoming me. I left off on chapter 9, the end of the road. I'm about halfway through the chapter, and I was just gonna finish it up today. And so, before I get started, I just wanted to say that this past couple of weeks actually, since I graduated from Aurora University, I've been learning a lot about myself and learning a lot about taking initiative on things that I really want and things that I'm really passionate about. And over this past week, that passed last week, I had to make some hard decisions. I used to be the type of person to just be glad that I was afforded an opportunity or I was picked or chosen for something, even if I knew in my heart that that was not the right position for me. I would take it because I was accepted, and I didn't think that I would get what I really wanted. But the Lord has really been working on me and showing me that if I'm really passionate about something, I need to pursue what it is that I really want to do instead of just accepting something because it's there or because it's convenient, and because I think I can't do any better. And so that's something that God has really been working on me with, and I thank Him for it because I am very I don't know how to describe it. I'm the type of person that I'm okay with whatever. I'm very passive on a lot of situations until it builds up. Now, once it builds up and I'm fed up, it's a different story. But up until then, I'm very easygoing. I'm very, whatever, I'll accept anything. And, as a child of God, we want to be pleasant. We want to be nice people. But the Lord doesn't want us to be pushovers. And I've really been a pushover all my life. People say, "Hey, do this." I'll say, "Okay," and it's like, okay, I have no problems with it. But then on the flip side, I'll be upset with myself, like, "Dang, Candace, you should have asserted yourself. You should have said, no, this isn't what I want to do." There's a nice way to turn things down or to turn people down. But I just hate disappointing everybody. But I realize, especially with these interviews that I've been going on, I can't please everybody. If I'm accepted to a job and I feel like it's not the right position for me, I have to decline it, whether or not it's going to disappoint someone or not. And I have to come to the realization that disappointing people is not, you know, if I went for an interview and somebody didn't want me or they felt like I'm not right for the position, they're not going to be upset because they turned me down. So why should I be upset that I turned them down if I feel like the position isn't right for me? And so that's something that I have really been working on, and God has really been showing me that it's okay to not agree with everyone, and it's okay to not please everybody. And it's an uncomfortable feeling for me very uncomfortable because I'm such a people pleaser. I don't want to disappoint anybody. But, sometimes it is going to happen anyway. Some people, I mean, it's, you can't please everybody. And so with that, I'm going to go start reading my book of Becoming Me. This is chapter 9, End of the Road. And I think I ended it somewhere around here. I'm not really sure where. So, all right. I think I ended it at this part of the story where where my husband at the time, was being kind of mean to my daughter. And I stood up for her. And of course, I put in here, and at this point, I did not care about hurting his feelings because he was a jerk. Hold on. So this part of the story, I'm talking about what happened after I stood up to my ex-husband, which was my husband at the time, and after he was saying things that wasn't so nice to my daughter. So, of course, he turned all of his anger towards me and started yelling and cursing at me. I had my daughter and my son go into her room and lock the door. I had a feeling that everything was going to come to a head that day. He was right in my face yelling at me, but I stood my ground. I told him that if he hit me, I was going to call the police, but he needed to leave. He told me he was not going anywhere. Then he said that he did not have to hit me himself because he was going to get someone to jump me. Another little backstory about my husband. Every apartment or everywhere we lived together, when we would move in within the 6 months of our marriage, every time he would say he's not going to mess around with people in the apartment building. He would always say, man, I'm going to keep to myself. I'm not going to mess around. I'm not going to talk to nobody. I'm not going to make any friends, like acquaintance, whatever he called them. So he would, well, then the next thing I know, he would be hanging out with somebody who lived around the apartment or down the street. He would find friends, even though this was he promises, because I don't say swear, but he promises this was not his intention. But I guess these people always found him. So he would hang out with these people so much you would think that they were lifelong friends. No matter where we lived, he would find friends and rather be with them instead of being at home. Living in this house was no different. And a little backstory, we were living in, actually where we're living now, which is my grandparents' home. We moved here when my son was about 6 months, well, about 3 months old. And at the time, my ex-husband moved in with us, and he was my husband at the time. And so this is just a little story I put in the book. One day earlier that year, when we first moved in, my children and I were driving home, and we drove past a group of teens watching 2 teen girls fighting in the middle of the street. As I drove past, I saw my husband at the time in the middle of those kids recording these 2 teenage girls fighting. I quickly looked away from him, but not before our eyes met. So I know he saw me. When he came home hours later, he said nothing about what he was doing outside. We had been living there in the home for maybe 3 months at the time. A couple of weeks later, he asked me if I remembered that situation, and then he showed me how he had posted it on Facebook, the video that he made. I was disgusted that I was even married to someone like him. I said all that to say, in a nutshell, that when he told me he would have someone jump me, I believed him because I did not know what he was up to or into. I believed that he had some people around that would jump me if he had told them to. And that's the thing about my ex-husband. He has friends. you, you never know about friends, how crazy they are or what they're into or anything, and at the time I really didn't know what my ex-husband was into. Husband at the time. We were like strangers in the home together, and I didn't know who he was talking to. I didn't know who he was spending his time with. I didn't know anything about him at the time. So I was afraid. So after he told me that, I was in shock. I knew that he did not care about me, but I never thought he would go so far as to have someone jump me and beat me up. I was his wife and the mother of his child, so that really hurt me. It did. And recently I have talked to him about it. I don't know if he even remembers the situation, because I've realized this about people. Situations that stand out in my mind may not stand out in another person's mind. So, and they see it two different ways. His perspective of the situation is not my perspective of the situation. So, but he does remember this part. And I shouldn't be laughing. But anyway, so I went to my room and prayed, and the Lord clearly spoke to my heart and told me to go to the police station and file a report. I did not know if they could even help me, but I went. When I got there, I told them what happened, and they asked me if I wanted to press charges against him, and I said yes. I was told to stay there until they picked him up within a half hour. He was in jail, and they told me I can go home, but I must show up to court the next day if I wanted him to be charged. So yeah, I had him arrested, and that was the one and only time I had my ex-husband arrested. And I don't even know if, because after that point he never lived in the home with us again, if it would even made a difference in our relationship. I don't know. I'm not even sure, because after that point it was like, okay, relationship over. This is done. It was done. And so when I got there, okay, I read that part. At that moment, I felt defeated. I knew if they had just let him wait. Okay, no. All right, I skipped the paragraph. When I got there to court, I told them what happened, and they asked me if I wanted to press charges. I read that part. All right, the next day I showed up at court, and I was helped with a complaint. But when we got to see the judge, he said that he did not want to charge him. It was because there was no history of abuse, which I should have maintained a history of abuse. And I did not know the name of the person who he said was going to jump me. At that moment, I felt defeated. I knew if they had just let him go, things would have gotten much worse for us, my children and I. But then the judge said he would continue the case for 45 days. And he was not to have, and my ex-husband was not to have contact with us, the children and I, for those 45 days. I was relieved with that information, although I was not sure what would happen after that. During that time, before the next court date, I prayed. I told the Lord I knew that He would work it out, and whatever He decides, I would be all right with. And if they drop the charges, I wanted the Lord to please help me to be all right with that too. By the time the day came, I was at peace with the situation. On the day we were supposed to be there early and wait for our case to be called. So that first court date, we were there, and the judge, he was there. He came straight from jail, and I showed up, and the judge basically, his hands was tied, but he did give that 45 days, and I was relieved. So he was not supposed to have any contact with us. I had the temporary restraining order, and that was that. I don't know where he went. I don't know who he was with in all of that time. Didn't care, because all the time he terrorized me and the children, and he didn't care, and it was like, it was time for me to start looking out for myself and my children instead of always caring about hurting somebody else's feelings. So on the day on the day of the next court date, I should have put that in there. We were supposed to be there early and wait for our case to be called. It took a while, but finally the judge was reviewing our case. It was a different judge from the one that had continued the case. I was still sitting down as the judge reviewed the case, but I could see everything that he was saying to his assistant. Yeah, if you've ever been in the courtroom, the judge is up there, he's kind of high, and you're sitting out waiting for your time to speak to him. But I could hear everything because it was a small courtroom. This was before COVID, so it was a little different. So everybody was just in the courtroom. But so he told her, I don't know why he, the other judge, continued this case. There's no evidence, and there's nothing I can do. So, and at that point, my heart sunk. It sunk, because I'm like, oh, crap. I'm like, man, it sucked. It really sucked, because, I knew if he had come back to the house, and they, he was just going to be more careful next time, but he was still going to be mean and hateful and just terrorize us, and I did not want that. They finally called us to the stand. They called my name, and I stood, and they called my husband's name, and everyone looked around. He was not there. The judge said that he would put the case off to the side and give him a chance to show up. So after the judge finished all the rest of the cases, he called us again. Still, my husband was a no-show. The judge was furious. He was going to throw the case out, but since my husband did not even show up, the judge held him in contempt of court. That was automatically the stiffest sentence he could allow. A default judgment of a 2-year no contact order that went into effect as soon as my husband was served. After the paperwork was drawn up, I signed it. My husband walked into the today I don't know how to read. Okay, well, maybe every day, who knows. I signed it, and my husband walked into the door. The court assistant told me to leave right away because they were going to serve him. So I left. My sister was in the hallway with my son, and she said that he was out there on his phone the whole time. I was so grateful to God for what He had done for me. He had worked it out in such a way that it could have only been done by Him. When I tell you that, that could have only been done by God. I mean, when people tell me that God isn't in the details, God is the details, okay? he he knows the amount of hairs on top of our head. If you can't tell me that God is not in the details, He is in every detail. And He worked it out that day, and I still remember that. That was it was a miracle to me because I knew for sure that he was going to be back in the house and it was going to be horrible. So, I was so grateful to God for what He had done for me. He had worked it out in such a way that it could have only been done by Him. When I think about the whole situation, the scripture that comes to mind is Romans 8:28. And we know that God causes everything to work together for the good of those who love God and are called according to His purpose for them. And you know what? That scripture comes to my mind a lot because just like the situation where I had to turn down a couple of job opportunities because it wasn't the right fit. I was kind of salty because I had never done that before. And, the Lord reminded me that everything works out for my good as long as I am in His will. And I have to just trust that. I have to just believe it. And so, everything in our lives, has been worked out since before we stepped foot on the earth. He loves us every day, but He cannot fully show His work in our lives until we fully trust and let Him, so that we may have an abundant life. Wow, Candace, you was on point even back then, girl. I finally realized this after that situation, that was what God wanted for me. And through this situation, He was preparing me for something even bigger, something that I had avoided for many years. Okay, so, yeah, that was chapter 9. There's only 10 chapters in this book, but there's also some other little writings that I had. And like I said, I will go over those maybe a couple at a time. And so I want to thank you for joining me for this conversation today. I have to say, this whole book and reliving these situations is very rough for me. But I have to tell myself that if it can help somebody, that's all I want. Making these videos on YouTube is hard for me. But if it can help somebody, one person, then that's what I want to do. I want my life to be a vessel. I want it to be used by God. I want it to be, some people say you used by God. Some people say you partner with God. I want to partner with Him. I want Him to use me. I want what He wants from me. But so much of my life has been full of hurt and pain that it's hard for me to express things that I've gone through. But if God can use it for good, then that's what I want. And so I thank you for joining me having this conversation with me. And as always, if you know of a child or if you are a child who has been sexually abused or who is currently being sexually abused, that's my dog in the background, if you can hear him. I beg you, encourage you to please call your local law enforcement agency 911 or the National Child Abuse Hotline, which is 1-800 for a child. And if you are an adult who has been through sexual abuse or any kind of abuse, I want you to please find someone to talk to, find someone that can help you through the situation. I'm going to end it now because I have to let my dog out. But as always, I thank you for taking some time to join me today. Sorry that I can't talk today. But as always, be blessed.